Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. My next guest is another consumer products superstar. I first met her more than a decade ago when we were both working at Kraft Foods. She was at that point the global CMO, working hard to reinvigorate such iconic brands as Oreo, Maxwell House, Jell-O, and Toblerone. From Kraft, she went on to become the global brand president for Avon International and then the president of Godiva. Sounds like a delicious career to me. Today, she serves on many company boards and is an active investor and advisor to branded consumer companies and mission-based organizations. Most recently, she was on the board of one of our family's favorite brands, Seventh Generation, and helped them successfully set up an acquisition by Unilever. When I think of her, three words come immediately to mind: capable, committed, caring. I'm talking about Jeri Finard, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce her to you today. Jeri, welcome.
Thank you, Perry, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Oh, completely deserved. So we know that you got to the top and you're now serving on a lot of company boards and really getting to focus on mission-based organizations and pursue your passion. But everybody's journey had to start somewhere. It's kind of the period we call launch. So could you tell us a little bit about what was it that launched you and how did you land that opportunity?
Well, just to be clear, I was not one of those people who knew growing up what I wanted to do. So I would say that rather than being self-directed, I kind of stumbled into my path. But I ended up feeling like I wanted to do marketing. I went to business school for that, and I actually arrived at Columbia Business School in the mid-'80s when everybody was on their way to Wall Street, except me, of course. And it was actually a difficult time. But I graduated from Columbia. I got a job at what was then General Foods, and I started on a marketing career. And honestly, I was really fortunate because I was surrounded by a lot of really talented people in a company that mentored people and where they really wanted to create leaders. But my first big launch period was probably at a time when the company had been bought and was merging with another company. And my immediate boss, the people who were the head of the division, were just taken away to some other area. And so our whole division was left without a leader. And without even realizing it, I stepped into what was a vacuum of leadership, and everybody started coming to my office telling me their stories and how worried they were about not going to have a job, and we didn't know who was going to be leading, et cetera. And so when HR needed somebody to come and say, okay, who should we take, who's willing to move, I somehow became the de facto leader through that. And at the same time, by the way, I was getting my own resume together, wondering myself what my future was going to be. But interestingly enough, because I kind of absorbed that role, when the time came to make all the different moves, et cetera, I had become the de facto leader, and the company came to me and they said, listen, we want to find a place for you. We don't know what it is, but we're going to find a place for you because you've shown yourself during this period to be somebody who steps up and takes initiative when needed. And in many ways, that was kind of what put me on the board, at Kraft.
That's excellent. And thank you for sharing that, because one of the things, you said two things there that I think are really, really important. One is, honestly, most careers have a fair degree of stumbling, okay? Like stumbling into it, serendipity, it just happens. It wasn't exactly what you planned. So I always tell people, it's important to have a plan, but you've got to recognize that it is very unlikely that your life is going to actually unroll or unravel exactly the way you have the plan. So I think that's actually great for people to understand, because there's a lot of young women out there who are really stressed about the fact they don't know exactly how their first job is going to go, right? And the truth is, none of us knew. So you're in good company there. I think the second thing you said that really resonated with me is that it wasn't a specific job that existed, right? You actually created your own opportunity. And I think that's another thing that's really, really important. Proactivity, kind of just doing the right thing, raising your hand, all of these things are what create opportunities and help women stand out early on. And so I just say again, and you're a great example of it, don't wait for somebody to offer you something. You just went and did it because it just felt like the right thing for you to do. And then the offer came. And so I think those are two really, really important things from that story. So moving on in your career, I do know that you got married and you had kids. And I don't know anybody, male or female, who hasn't in that kind of mid-career phase struggled with the balance, if we can use that word, because we know there's really no such thing as balance, but the trade-offs between caregiving, whether it's for elderly parents these days or for kids, and building a career. So in this period, what choices and compromises did you make? How did you make it work? Did you ever feel like throwing in the towel?
Absolutely. Yeah. Who hasn't felt like throwing in the towel at some point? And I have. So first, I'll say I'm really fortunate because even though we didn't have family nearby, we did have enough money between my husband and I both working to hire help when we needed it. And I also have an incredibly supportive spouse, and that just helps a lot. Mm-hmm. But in my case, we have 3 children, and my 2 boys both had learning disabilities growing up. And everybody's story is individual, so everybody's path's a little different about where the choices they make. But for me, my boys, who, by the way, are great and graduated from college and have jobs and everything, happy ending to the story. But at the time, they had learning disabilities, and I had a whole support system that we had set up around that in terms of having an IEP at the school, having tutors, and so the whole support system that goes with that, doctors, et cetera. So when the company merged and they moved the headquarters out of town, they very much wanted me to move as well. And that's where it came to a pivot point, and I kind of said, look, I'm going to draw my line in the sand here. I'm not going to move my kids outside this school district because this is where I have the whole support system set. And it did limit my career, and it was difficult sometimes to watch other people who I felt were less deserving or had less behind them move up faster because I had made a choice not to move. But I will say this, at one point the company offered me a job. It was still on the East Coast, which is where I live. I live in New York, and it was in New Jersey, and they thought I would take it. It was a great job. And I turned down that job as well, and I told them it's not just about being on the East Coast, it's about staying in this school district. And so I took what I thought at the time was a lesser job that they offered me, so that I could be so I could make things right with my family. And I felt at the time that I was kind of taking one for the family. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, it turned out to be the most amazing experience because I was leading a division that nobody had any expectations for. It hadn't grown in a long time. And I went in there and built a team and put through an innovation pipeline, and we turned that business around, and we grew that business 3 years consecutively. And in many ways, I got a lot of recognition for that because people didn't expect anything. I was off the radar screen. It wasn't the big, exciting, division that I had turned down, but it was a lesser division that ended up really contributing to the company's bottom line. And so I became known then as somebody who could grow and turn around businesses. So despite having taken taking a hit for the family as I thought of it at the time, it really ended up being a launch pad for me, and so, had a happy ending. But was a difficult decision. Yeah,
I am sure, and I think that, again, I thank you for sharing that because there's not one of us that hasn't faced some type of choice. I mean, I've actually now done it twice. My company was almost the exact same situation. We were living in Connecticut. I was working in Connecticut and New York, and the company headquarters were moving to New Jersey. Many people were choosing to do the 2-hour commute. It would have been almost 2 hours each way for me, but I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, and I said, there is no way I'm going to have a newborn, a big job, and a 4-hour commute. And so I chose to step down instead of, continuing on. And people thought I was crazy, but it turned out, again, to be the right choice. I think the other thing that was really interesting about what you said is that despite they're really trying to work with you, and I know personally that Kraft is a great company, and they really do try to, they've done a great job in promoting and building a lot of very successful women. But what's interesting is they still didn't actually understand what you were going for, right? They came up with this opportunity. They thought because it was in New Jersey, it was going to be okay for you. And it took you being extremely explicit with them about what you really needed and wanted for them to get the understanding that, it isn't just the East Coast. It actually is this exact location. So she will not relocate at all at this point in time. And I think it really proves the point that I try to make to people, which is even in companies that have your best interest at heart and that are trying to work with you, they don't know really what you want unless you exactly tell them. And then you have to be willing, it's the quid pro quo, which you did, which is you have to be willing to then accept the consequences and still really be engaged in your career. So you know, it was hard. You saw other people moving up, but you stayed engaged and you ended up turning something around and actually then made a winner out of something that wasn't necessarily the best career move in terms of what you had on your plate or what your options were at the beginning. So I think that's great.
Exactly. It's very hard to watch other people move ahead who haven't had to make the same trade-offs that you've made. But listen, it's your life, right? I mean, you have to make your own decisions, and and that's what I did.
Yep. I think one of my other guests said, one of the most important two pieces of advice she had was, one, you have to learn to put down the guilt, and two, you have to own the consequences of the decisions you make. Don't get, defensive or upset or anything else. It's like you got what you most wanted, and now you need to come to terms with that and then press forward. So
exactly.
Well done.
Exactly.
So I want to now look forward, because you did make several transitions. You did ultimately take other jobs. I know, because you ended up out in Chicago. Even really confident, capable women can feel nervous or unsettled when it comes to a big transition. I'm coaching several of them right now who are just amazing women. And I myself found that even though I had a year to prepare and I chose to step down when I left Kraft, it still was one of those things where after I did it, I got to admit, I kind of floundered. I mean, I had work and everything, but I was not fully settled and happy for a while because I had just spent so many years doing kind of this big job thing for big corporates. So what advice would you have for other women who are facing a major career transition or creating a second act? How did you get it together for yourself? How did you deal with it, both in terms of kind of landing or creating the future, but then also dealing perhaps if you felt uncertain or lost or not really settled? How did you deal with that?
I think for me, my feeling is I'm always uncomfortable in the beginning, and I know that about myself. So when I take something new and it seems scary and big, it feels uncomfortable. And so I have often gone with the advice that I know a lot of other people have taken, which is the old, fake it till you make it. But I'm actually a big believer in that. I think that when I step into a new role, I put on the persona almost like I'm playing a role of whatever it might be, and I wear that for a while, and then I see either one of two things happens. Either it becomes super comfortable, and I actually end up embracing that, and it becomes part of who I am, and I feel very comfortable, or it continues to feel uncomfortable. And after 6 to 9 months, if it's still feeling uncomfortable and a little uneasy, then I need to shed it. Then I say, okay, it's time for me to do something different. This, in fact, was not a good move for me. And that's what happened. When I ended up commuting to Chicago, I never moved to Chicago, but I did commute there, and I did it for about 18 months before I realized I was too uncomfortable. It was too much of a give up for me, and that's when I actually left Kraft. And I think they were very understanding of the choice I made at the time. I had been there over 20 years. I'd been there a long time, and certainly assumed a lot of roles there. But I just never felt completely comfortable with that, and I ended up leaving, and I think that was the right decision. I felt much more comfortable after I had done it.
Mm-hmm. And so talk to us about how you then moved from Kraft. So you stepped down from being CMO, I remember that, and I also actually applauded you at that time. You didn't know it, but silently I applauded you because I thought, she's doing the right thing for her. Right? And that really is what it's all about. That's why I kind of talk about this as the career and life of your dreams, right? Because everybody's different. Everybody has to make their own choices. So you made that choice for you. How did you decide what came next, and how did you then make it happen?
Well, the interesting thing is my only criteria after I left Kraft was whatever I do next, it has to be in New York. And I kind of made that like my first criteria. I'm not doing that commute again. It was too long. Listen, this is one of the things about working at a big company and also about networking and reaching out, which I think women have to do for each other. We owe it to each other to help each other and to network. And in my case, somebody who used to, be at Kraft was now at Avon, and when she found out I was free, relatively quickly she reached out to me and said, you got to come here. It's in New York. It's a great position. And interestingly enough, it wasn't the exact position I wanted. I really wanted to go back to running a P&L, and this was another position that was a support role in that it was global brand president, but it did not have its own P&L. It was a cross matrix. But I loved the mission of the company so much, this idea about empowering women, and Avon at the time, and probably still, is the greatest microlender to women entrepreneurs globally. And I loved that mission. And so I joined for that, and it was really, I learned a ton about a whole new industry. It opened my eyes to lots of different pieces, and I do not regret going to that role.
Excellent. Thank you. So then you're there. You are at an executive level. You've talked a little bit about the support systems you had to create for your kids, but what about the support systems for you? Because we know, there's an old adage, it's lonely at the top, but it's even more so for women because, frankly, there are just so many fewer of us. So what is your personal support system, and how did you create it?
I would say it's built on kind of two legs. The first is my husband. So my husband has always been my biggest confidant. He's always telling me, before you react, think about how a man would react and decide if you want to react that way. And that's actually been very helpful. Because one of the things I never realized was how often I apologize or make a disclaimer before I say something. Mm-hmm. And he pointed that out to me. He said, you're forever saying, the number of times you start with, I'm sorry, but, or, well, I'm not sure, that others would think this, but, da-da-da-da. He said, you've got to stop that. He said, no man does that. They just go out there and say what they're going to say. And so he's been an incredible champion behind the scenes and somebody who I can bounce ideas off of, and he's certainly my biggest support system. But the other big support system is, I was lucky enough that my first board was a public board, and it was a diverse board. There were other women already on the board. And between those other women that I've served with on boards, and that was an unusual situation, by the way. Most boards I'm on, I'm the only woman. Mm-hmm. But this was an unusual situation. And I did, between those women and other women who came up, through Kraft and through Avon with me, who are also in C-suite positions and sitting on boards now, have become my support system. And I often reach out for them to drop, to either bounce things off of them, or I think to myself, how would so-and-so handle this situation? Mm-hmm. She would be so good at it. And it's very helpful. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that one of the things I think that you just said is, so when you look to other people and you're open and you reach out, and, I'm always amazed at how many people actually are willing to help if you have the guts to actually reach out. So I think that obviously that was something you did. Let me ask you also, how do you quid pro quo that? So, for example, when we talk about, a lot of people talk about whether it's networking or mentors or sponsors or whatever, it's all about, it can't be a one-way street. So do you find it was a natural thing where you were able to actually, these women also then came to you so you could really make it something where you supported each other?
Absolutely. Everybody is looking for the support, and everybody wants to bounce ideas off, especially, with younger women too. I really make sure that I am accessible. I'm not a very intimidating person, so people do reach out to me a lot. And I try to give back because I think it's really important that we help each other. It's the only way we're going to really make big societal changes.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Hence the reason for this platform. So let me ask you, you've achieved a lot. You have a fair degree of financial security. What is it that keeps you motivated? Because I know you're still a very busy woman. So what is it that keeps you motivated at this point?
I've really made a change now because now that I have a little bit more flexibility and my kids have graduated from college, so I really do have flexibility, I want to contribute to world-positive businesses. And I'm a big believer, as I know you are, Perry, and we have that in common, that business, along with working with the public and the not-for-profit sectors, is probably our best chance at solving the world's really big social and economic issues and challenges. And so what I really want to do is support companies and entrepreneurs who are trying to change the world through business. And, so managing social enterprises, B corporations, transparent organizations that want to both make money but also make big social changes at the same time. And so that's what I'd really like to support most. And it's pretty new to me in terms of, embarking on this world of investing and advising world-positive enterprises. So I'm learning, I'm reaching out to people. It's been really fun. I'm getting really energized by meeting with different people who feel the same. It's a great organization, and it's actually very on trend right now. I think the millennial generation is right in with this. They feel like global citizens. They know that it takes a village, and I'm finding it really energizing.
Yeah, I the same. I think and you actually point out a very interesting thing, and it's one of the reasons that I hope we can get more women to stay in the pipeline, whatever it takes in terms of what they have to do personally to make it work for them, but to stay in the pipeline, because after you hit the executive level, you have all the experience, you have the networks, you have the skills, the capabilities. That's when you can pivot from, perhaps money to meaning, right? Now, hopefully you've had meaning all the way up to some degree, but a lot of us, you do have to actually get a certain amount of financial security before you can just kind of go after your pet projects or your passions if they don't actually pay, right? So you get to the top, and now you're able to say, okay, it is about what is my personal meaning. And for you, it is what I agree with, which world positive businesses, which I think is a great way to think about it. And you bought yourself that opportunity by all of the work you did all the way up. And that's why I really hope other women listen to that and think before they decide to step out, before they kind of throw in the towel, that if you just stay in there, if you can find a way to get the support and hang in, you can have a second act that is really powerful and super fun. I mean, I've never had so much fun. So it's both about meaning, and yes, there is financial reward also, but it's also just really fun.
It is, and I think also, and I know this, because my own kids struggle with this. They want to give back. They want to immediately find something they're passionate about and start doing something that changes the world. And I think that's great. I love that. But I also caution them and say, listen, before you can go and change the world in a positive manner, you need to develop some skills. Mm-hmm. So, get out there first, get the skills you need so that when you go and you find, the one thing that you're super passionate about, you have something really concrete to offer them. And so it's a tough thing because everybody wants to start, changing the world right away. And I think that's great. And if you can do it early on, that's terrific. But not everybody can. Sometimes you need to develop the skills first so that you really know when it comes time to, build, you have something to build with.
Yep. I could not have said it better. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, a lot of women, we get to the top and younger women are looking at all the interviews that are out there and everything. And it all basically looks like we're walking on sunshine, right? There's not a lot of people who are really focused on the failures, the obstacles, the embarrassments, the outrageous behaviors, whatever. And yet, I don't know a single successful woman who didn't have to overcome some bad breaks or failures or been on the receiving end of, frankly, some really unacceptable behavior. So since it clearly didn't derail your rise to the top, would you be willing to share with listeners some or one of the most difficult or outrageous things that happened to you? And how did you handle it? How did you either pick yourself back up or how did you brush it off and move forward?
I think the one that comes to mind, when you put it like that, the one that comes to mind was one that literally took my breath away. I'm somebody, like you, I'm somebody who usually does not have trouble finding words, but this one made me completely speechless. It was my first day back from maternity leave with my first child, and I was, it's a difficult day anyway, already vulnerable, and I came across somebody in the hall, a man, and he said to me, "Oh, you're back." He said, "Well, how does it feel to be back at work and have someone else raising your child?"
Oh!
And
wow.
I was stunned. It was like somebody punched me in the gut. I did not know what to say, and I was too probably close to tears to say anything. And when I got home, I repeated this to my husband, and he said, "Well, why didn't you ask him the same thing? I mean, he's also at work leaving somebody else, even if it's his wife, leaving someone else raising his child. Why didn't you ask?" And I said, I don't know. I was so stunned at the time, and it was so, mean. Anyway, so here's what I did. I went back. I never said anything to that man. I have to say I never had the courage to go back and say anything to that man. But what I did do is I started what we called it the mommy group at work, and this was a time when we could call it like that. And what we did is I got a lot of other kind of young working moms, and we had a brown bag lunch that we did once a month, and we came together and we supported each other and shared stories And it was tremendously helpful. It was helpful for everything from when do I have to start thinking about getting my kids into camp, which, by the way, is February, unbelievably early. I would never have known that. To sharing kind of one person shared, a dear friend of mine shared about, raising her children in a mixed race and mixed religion family and the challenges like, that down to challenges that happen at work and things like that. And we shared, and for many years we had that mommy group, and it was a really great support. So I will say it was a terrible experience to hear that, but something did come out of it because it galvanized me into action.
Mm-hmm. And you ended up not only helping yourself, but actually helping lots of other moms, because again, this is a universal experience. There is just no mom who doesn't feel something, right? And it's all, I interviewed one mom who actually had the opposite experience. She was like, I couldn't stay home. I realized after 3 weeks that I was looking forward to going back to work. I love my kids, but I couldn't be a stay-at-home mom. And she struggled with that decision, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter which way we go. All of us are racked with guilt and uncertainty and what's the best thing for my kids and how do I handle it? And so I think it's great that you created a safe space for yourself and for others to really sort these things out, because I, like you, did not realize that I should have signed up for preschool like when I was pregnant. I'd forget. I didn't even have a baby yet. And in Connecticut, they were telling me, oh, you haven't signed up yet? So it was like, no, I'm working. What are you talking about? I could have used that mommy group. So this is what I call the fun round. I just want to ask you some quick questions that aren't directly related necessarily to strict career advice, but I still think are really insightful. So what is the one word you would use to describe the professional path so far, and why?
I would use the word scary. And I mean that in a good way, because early on I had seen this great quote that says, if you're not terrified of your next move, you're not moving fast enough. And I really thought about that. And so when I would hesitate, it would be that quote would be the thing that made me say, just go do it. Just go do it and try it. And even if you're terrified, you're pushing yourself and you're trying something new. And so I would say scary, but exhilarating as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a great word. And I think you are so right. I mean, it's just all of us by nature, right? Fear, scare, we kind of move away from it. But the truth is, if this is where I do completely agree with Sheryl Sandberg, if you lean in to scary, right? If you get out of your comfort zone, if you stretch yourself, whatever, very rarely does something actually really bad happen, right? Because even if you fail, you grow, you learn, you know what not to do. I mean, there's just it's almost a uniquely win-win thing if you lean in and you really go for growth. And you might be scared to death doing it, but it's so worth it.
Exactly. If you're not growing, you're dying. So keep going.
That is a great way to think about it. Okay. So who has inspired you, or who does inspire you?
I'm always inspired by people who are courageous, people who are willing to speak out when they see injustice and do something about it. And it's why I like to be associated with social enterprises like Seventh Generation, the board, that I've been on one of the boards I've been on for the last 5 years, because they're not just making products that are good for the world, that are non-toxic and plant-based, et cetera, but there's also an advocacy piece. Mm-hmm. They're out there lobbying in Washington to try to make changes to the law so that companies have to be more transparent about what they're putting into products that people put on their skin. Mm-hmm. And they're really, the advocacy piece is really important. There's another great company called Beauty Counter out in Santa Monica. It's a personal care product, all natural, but they also have an advocacy piece. They're out there lobbying Congress to make sure that companies are more transparent about what's going into our beauty products, which is really important. And I think anybody who's courageous, who's willing to go out and really try to make changes, is really inspiring to me. It's also why I'm a big fan of Michelle Obama. Mm-hmm. I like Michelle Obama, and I will say that in the beginning I wasn't sure about her, but she is somebody who doesn't shy away from speaking up on difficult topics, and she uses the platform she has to shine a light on injustices and wrongs, and she does it with authenticity and honesty, and I find that really inspiring.
I agree. I happen to be a huge fan of hers, and I kind of never understood why people thought And, I know I'm not necessarily speaking for all Americans, but like there were a lot of Americans who were like, oh, she seems too pushy as a first lady, and she's, too domineering, or she's too, and I just thought, wow, is that not what you'd want? Like a bright, capable, out there woman who's making a difference in the world? Like, why is that not a great first lady role model? Because that's what I want my daughter to see. I either want her to be president or that kind of first lady. So, yeah,
exactly.
So that actually, it leads right to the next question, which is, if you could have a superpower roundtable with 3 women, alive or not, who would they be and why?
Okay. I can only get 3. I think I need a cocktail party. I think a roundtable is not enough. I need a cocktail party.
Okay, you get a cocktail.
Okay, my best favorite is Eleanor Roosevelt. There's so many things. She was brave and courageous in so many ways. I'd have Eleanor Roosevelt. I'd have Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'd have Harriet Tubman. I'd have Michelle Obama. I'd bring in Jane Austen. I mean, these are all courageous women who were willing to buck the trend, call out social injustice, and still be true to themselves. I'd add Madeleine Albright, Golda Meir, George Eliot, Roxana Gay. I mean, there's so many incredibly interesting, courageous women who I would just love to have at a giant cocktail party full of strong women.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and what I love is that actually, at this point, we could actually do that. We could fill many, many halls with amazing women because there are a lot to choose from. And I like every one of your choices. So please invite me to the cocktail party.
Absolutely. And Perry Yeatman for sure.
Oh, God. So at this point in your life, you've talked about what inspires you. You've talked about what motivates you. What is it that you're really looking forward to?
I'm really looking forward to helping to nurture some of these entrepreneurial organizations and startups that are trying to do social good at the same time that they're trying to be a capitalistic, for-profit enterprise. And I think in the mentoring role and kind of giving strategic advice is one of the roles that I embrace the most, that I get, probably as much, if not more, from than I'm even giving. So that's what I'm most excited about.
Excellent. Okay, we're coming down to the end of our time together on this, so I want to give you a couple last words. So I'll give you a couple choices. You can answer any way you want. If you could do it all again, what advice would you give to your younger self? Or what's the best piece of career advice you ever got?
The advice I'd give to my younger self, I think, is that it's always difficult to decide which bridges you cross and which bridges you burn. And I think in general, despite having, the choices I make, I think I stayed too long with certain choices, even after I knew that I should probably move on. And maybe I wasn't confident enough to move on. I would move faster. I'd be less afraid of burning bridges that I knew I'd never want to cross again. I would never again stay at a place where it was domineered by men who really did not respect women, because I had one of those experiences. Mm-hmm. And I would have left sooner. I mean, I did leave, but I would have left sooner. I would leave sooner when it was clear that something wasn't right. And in terms of best advice, I think it's being honest about the challenges that you face as a woman trying to balance everything, all your many roles that you play. And I would ask for or hire the help that I needed quicker. I think that, if someone had told me that, if someone told me earlier, I would have hired more help. I would have asked for more help earlier on, because people are there and they are willing to help and they want to help. And also, sometimes you just have to hire what you need and give yourself a break. You can't do everything. You can't take it all on yourself. You need to ask for help.
Jeri, you have been such a delight and such valuable insights. I thank you for your time, and I'm sure our listeners are going to get a lot out of it.
Well, you're welcome, Perry, and thanks for giving me the opportunity. I actually really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people you'd like interviewed,